It's really nice to see you all. And I'm going to be talking about the engineer manager pendulum and kind of a bunch of the things that I have learned in the years since writing that blog post 2017. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Charity Majors. I am the co-author of Observability Engineering and Database Reliability Engineering. And I brought stickers, so if you happen to have the book, I will be armed with those tomorrow, because that's another thing that I forgot in my hotel room. So, management. There's a lot of assumptions that that I grew up having about management, like it's a one-way trip. It's always a promotion. You should seize it if the opportunity is ever offered to you, because it may not come again. There's scarcity around it. People who are managers are more important. They have more influence. Everybody wants to climb the ladder, because climbing the ladder is better. Higher is always better. And I think that earlier in my career, there was always this assumption that the best engineers would make the best managers. Now, almost none of those are true and or good things. And it results, if you believe these things, if you internalize these things, the result is we have a lot of managers who don't really want to be managing and take it out on everyone around them, or become managers for the wrong reasons and nobody wants to work for them. The team deserves, I think, a manager who wants to be there, who wants to be managing people, who is mostly not bitter about having to go to meetings instead of do technology, someone who's genuinely interested in process and in socio-technical systems, and I think that people deserve a manager whose technical skills are still strong enough and fresh enough at the very least, to independently evaluate the work that they do. I know that the model of having like a manager who just does people stuff and a tech lead who does all the technical stuff has been kind of all the rage in a lot of places, but I think that if we've learned anything, it's that split brain doesn't really work, right? If you have to outsource all of your judgment on technical issues to someone else, I don't actually think you can be a really good manager in this day and age. And you deserve, as speaking to you as the person, you deserve career advancement, no matter what your role is. You deserve a role that is challenging, that occupies you intellectually and your curiosity. You deserve to be building a long-term career for yourself. You deserve to work someplace that is not a dead end for you. You deserve most of all, I think, to preserve your optionality over the course of your career. Opportunities are rarely predictable, and in the industry we're in, they tend to come. If you're setting goals and you're like, I want to be, a VP by 6 years from now, I don't know that you'll have a lot of luck with that. But if you're like, I like a bunch of things, I'm going to follow, and be progressing in my career, I think that the opportunities that do open up to us tend to be kind of phenomenal. A long and varied career where you become more and more employable over time. And I feel like a better approach, instead of just setting goals or aspirations, is to not really peg your identity too tightly to either management or engineering, but to think of yourself as a technologist, as a technical leader, as someone who solves really interesting and complex problems that span socio-technical boundaries, and someone who needs both of these skill sets to really reach your fullest potential. Every single one of the leaders that I look up to in this world has had both of these skill sets. And a few years ago, when I wrote this post, to this day, this is the blog post that I have written that gets the most traffic, 2017, the Engineer Manager Pendulum. This was a pretty radical idea. I actually wrote this blog post. It was kind of a love letter to a friend of mine who was an engineering director at Slack at the time, and he was really struggling with, he wasn't happy. And I think he could tell he wasn't really the best person for the role anymore. He wasn't really happy, but in 2017, the idea of stepping away from that role to be an IC again had a lot of baggage with it. And I wrote this blog post for him, and Afterwards, he did go back to being an IC. He was the best fucking IC ever, and he's so happy. I'm really stoked that it struck a chord with so many other people. Now I think that this happens all the time, which is awesome. But it is still something that tends to be done by people who are bucking the systems around them. It tends to be done by, exceptions, people who are comfortable being an exception and stepping out of the regular path. I think that it should not be the exception, it should be the rule, because it really is the key towards not just individual flourishing over a long career, but for organizations to build healthy, flexible, creative teams where everybody is pushing the limits of what they can do and really wants to be there doing what they do. So if our institutions are not really set up to accommodate this, how can we change them? Well, it starts with you can't just let it happen, and you can't just trust that individuals, one after another will kind of accumulate like pebbles, and eventually a path will get built, because it doesn't really work that way. It will take work. It means actively making the case for why this is a better way to everyone, from your leadership, your engineers, your managers, your HR teams, because while there are policy changes being made, and we will talk about some of them, it really lives in the hearts and minds of the people that you work with. It lives in the aspirations of people who are trying to, tell where they're going to be in 5 years. And in, your leaders while they're planning, their organizations over the next several years. And yes, it's about retention, but really it's about the caliber of your technical leadership, because the best line managers I've ever worked with are never more than a few years removed from writing code. It gives you credibility, the kind you can't fake. It enables you to evaluate their work. It preserves your optionality and makes you maximally employable over the long run. Middle management is the first to get cut anytime there's a downturn. And you don't want to be too rusty when that happens. Conversely, the best staff plus engineers and tech leads that I've ever worked with have all done some time as an engineering manager. It helps you, as Mad said, it helps you learn how to solve these complex problems without reaching directly for code. It also gives you credibility in the eyes of other teams. And it helps you learn to translate between the world of engineering and the world of and the rest of the world. Ironically, you also get much better at wielding influence without authority, because, shocker, you can't actually lean on your authority that much as a manager, not if you actually want people to like working with you. But you don't have to choose one or the other, but you do have to choose one at a time, because being a great engineer involves focus, concentration, learning and solving hard problems, and being a good manager involves being available and being interrupted. You can only really excel at one of these at a time. So if you aren't already a solidly experienced senior engineer, don't go and become a manager. This happens a lot to women, especially, who have been engineering for like 2, 3, 4 years, and somebody's like, you have people skills, let's make you a manager, and it sounds like a compliment. You need a minimum, I think, of 7 to 8 engineers as an engineer first. You don't need to be the best engineer, but you do need experience, confidence, and good judgment. And enough years on the job that your skills aren't going to immediately atrophy, because writing code is like any other language skill. When you're immersed in it every day, it stays fresh. When you're visiting Spain, you're speaking it every day, cool. Once you leave, if you're an adult, it drops off very quickly. If you decide to try to management, I think you need to commit yourself to 2 years. It takes about that long to learn with your body what you know with your head, but less than 5 years, because at the 2 to 3 year point, that's when your skills really start to decay, especially the first time. In the same way that, writing code, is the experience of learning it makes it easier to learn to write other languages. The experience of going back once or twice actually makes it easier to go back and forth multiple times. Like that in and of itself, you can practice. But but less than 5 years because especially the first time, it gets really hard. And while it's not insuperably difficult, I find it's actually much harder after 5 years to find anyone who's willing to hire you as an engineer so that you can spend the time working your way back up than it is to actually regain those skills. Technical skills are a lot like speaking language. Management skills are stickier. You learn your people skills and they will go with you. They don't decay in the same way, which is interesting. But they're very local. Wielding them well requires a lot of knowledge of, the social structures that you're around. This is why, careers for engineers, if you change job every year or two, not that big of a deal. As a manager, it is kind of that big of a deal because so much of wielding your influence and being effective means building relationships and mapping out the relationship structures that are around you. And that just takes time. As a manager, you hear a lot of very well-intentioned advice telling you to stop writing code, stop being technical, and this advice is usually trying to counterbalance the fact that when you become a manager, when things get challenging, you automatically want to go back to your happy place where you feel in control and you feel in charge, and that's writing code. And it is a good idea to go cold turkey for a little while. But ultimately, our goal here, remember, is to preserve optionality and have a very long and fulfilling career. It's best if you don't let your language skills completely decay while you're on the management side, which means like the real golden line is do not do anything in the critical path. Do not do anything that people will be waiting for you to do. Pick up a bug here and there, that's cool. Do some little dev tools, tinkering on the side, but nothing that is must be done. One of my favorite ways that managers can continue to contribute after becoming a manager is to make yourself the on-call backup of first resort. This is not the same as putting yourself in the on-call rotation, which is something I did for years and was very proud of, but was not very smart because it worked fine at night. I had no problem getting woken up. The difficulty was when I got paged during the day. Now, smart teams with on-call rotations actually put a lot of effort into making sure that almost all of your pages come during the day. So during the day, I'm in the middle of one-on-ones and in meetings, and I'm getting paged all the time, so I'm having to duck out of my meetings, not do my job, or ask someone else to do it for me, which meant that they were doing my job, and that just wasn't a great idea. But what was a great idea was making myself the on-call backup of first resort, because that meant that anytime someone had a rough night, I could take the next night. Anytime somebody wanted to go to the movie theater on the weekend, I could take it for a few hours, right? I kept my skills fresh because, I was staying in touch with the system as it changed. And they didn't have to go through the whole bartering thing, right? Or keeping tabs of, well, I asked you for a movie last weekend, so can I have a movie this weekend, right? You just make it easy to ask you, and you're always there. Everybody loves it. But you cannot just be an engineering line manager forever. And I say this knowing full well that there are some of you out there who have done this and done great, and bully for you. Most of us, I think, I don't think it's a good aspiration. I don't think it's tenable for most of us because, well, not a good one anyway. P.S., not a great one. Because you do tend to get worse at it as your technical skills deteriorate. And there's a temptation for a lot of us to want to be this shiny little tech lead / manager, which is terrible. You should not do this. It feels so good to be a tech lead, and it feels so good to be a manager. But if you're taking up all that oxygen, you're not leaving any space for the engineers on your team to grow. If you're doing a good job as a manager, your engineers should eventually supersede you technically. And you need to leave space for that. You're there to support them, not to starve them of growth opportunities. So if you can't just be an engineering manager forever, you reach a fork in the road at some point where you have to decide, am I going to climb the ladder or am I going to go back to the well and refresh my technical skills? Everybody starts out thinking that they want to, okay, slide's a little bit out of order, whatever. Everybody starts out thinking that they want to climb the ladder because ladders are there and they're shiny and they're fun and higher is always better, right? What did we learn from public school and college, if not that every year we should graduate and go up another rung? It's not actually that simple. We tend to equate management with leadership, and I actually think that management is organizational leadership, engineering is technical leadership. I think one of the best things of the past few years has been that we've been starting to disambiguate these two and make it clear that technical leadership, technical decision-making belongs to technical practitioners in the same way that organizational leadership belongs to managers. If you're at a company that is kind of muddling their way through this process right now, you are not alone. It's not super fun, but it's a good path to be on because it's the way we make actual senior ICs, individual contributors, powerful late in their career. But managers in particular have a tendency to look up 10 years later and realize that the choices that they made have left them both less employable and deeply unhappy. And you can make either choice. You can go up or you can swing back, but make your decision with your eyes wide open. Because everybody starts out thinking they want to climb the ladder, just like most of us, not all of us, start out thinking that we want to be a manager someday. We're a baby engineer, we join, the manager seems to make all the decisions, have all the power, why wouldn't we want to do that? In fact, the best way for most of us to figure out that we don't actually want to be a manager is to do the job for a couple years. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important that we really internalize, all of us, that management is not a promotion, it's a change of career, because if management isn't a promotion, then engineering is not a demotion. And this is something that, you can say all day long, and it still kind of hits you in the gut when it comes your turn. And you if anyone, you call up your mom and you're like, Mom, they made me a manager, and your mom's gonna be like, oh, good job, congratulations. Everyone knows that means you've made progress, right? People don't throw you the same ticker tape parade when you become an engineer. So I feel like it's on us to lean against this culturally. And this is why whenever people tweet me and they're like, I'm becoming an engineer again, I'm like, yay, good for you. Because I think that we want people to be doing the job that makes them excited and fulfilled, right? We want people to be doing the job that they feel good about at the end of the day. And even if management it's kind of baked into that there's a hierarchy, right? That you go up, if there's an up, that means there's a down. I feel like the more we kind of lean into this idea that engineering is a creative, generative role, not one where you can just give orders, fix me that caching bug. It doesn't fucking work that way, right? The more it should become clear to us that these are not rigid hierarchical roles. They're ones where different roles make different decisions, have different areas of ownership. I'm going down a little side rant there, but there's no shame in not knowing what you want to do or who you want to be when you grow up. You can't force opportunities to happen. The more you get attached to outcomes, the more you set your heart on doing or being one thing or another, the more you actually wall yourself off of opportunistic joy. And most of us don't have a goal in mind when we start our career, and that's fine. I certainly didn't. I am as shocked as anyone that I am a CTO today. It was never the plan. And because of that, I think that if you aren't sure what to do, we always act to maximize our optionality. The industry is fast-moving and chaotic. Opportunities do abound. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. You keep your skills fresh, you make friends, you keep in touch, however loosely, with past coworkers who you've liked working with. Writing and speaking about your work is never a bad idea. If people can Google your name and a technology that you like comes up, that's great. Changing your role, if not your job, at least every 2 to 3 years. In my experience, that's about how long it takes to get to a place where you're comfortable, and comfort is death. Become a T-shaped engineer is still good advice, by which people mean go deep in at least one area and, go broad in many others. For women in underrepresented groups, developing a public profile can be incredibly valuable and easy. I mean, it's the flip side, right? Because social proof can counterbalance people's tendency to discount your technical expertise. Turns out, if they could Google and find your name next to something, that means it's true. So, downsides of climbing the ladder. Actually, I wanted to talk about this because some people are good at this and thrive doing it. I don't know many of them. They are rare. They might be saints. I'm not sure. Most of us feel deeply conflicted about the roles that we're in. The higher up on the job ladder you go, there is an order of magnitude fewer job openings at every step, minimum. Your skill set becomes much more specific and customized. It is harder to find a place that you fit in the world. If a CEO leaves a job, it's normal for it to take a couple of years for them to find their next gig. The more specific, the more local your skill set, the harder it is to find a place. It becomes harder and harder to go back to engineering. You become farther removed from the work that actually brings most of us a sense of meaning and satisfaction, which is creating things and fixing things, and building things, and seeing the impact of our work on the world. Your job tenure lengthens, you can't leave as easily. Every choice becomes riskier. And more of your ability to succeed is actually out of your hands. Your reputation tends to be defined by your company's success. And even if you're a C-level or a VP, your personal ability to will it to success is not enormous. The flip side of this, of course, is that there are many people out there with very fancy titles who are total dog shit. They just hopped on a rocket ship and coasted up to Mars. The number of VPs that were minted, VPs and CTOs were minted just because they happened to join Facebook at the right time is mind-blowing. Anyway. The landscape looks very different today than it did in 2017, which is good. Lots of people go back and forth, but there is rarely institutional support for this pendulum. Execs tend to see it as a wasted investment or a loss of leadership when managers or directors go back to engineering, which is why we have to actively reframe this to them in a way that helps them understand that tomorrow's leaders, engineering leadership, technical leadership, doesn't look like yesterday's leadership. It's not just the fancy titles. It's not just the people managers. If you're relying on the fancy titles and the people managers, you are not going to have a strong engineering culture because it's not defined by them. So much of a strong engineering culture is defined by how much of that power gets delegated to engineers who know their shit and love their jobs. This is how we cultivate great engineering leadership. That director or VP who went over to being a principal engineer. And here's something that I think a lot of people, yes, it's harder to go back and forth between management and engineering at the upper levels. But, and to some extent, every single person who does that will be a bit sui generis at this point. But I've never seen it not be worth it. Because there's so much systemic knowledge and tribal knowledge and experience and systems thinking that you get to absorb and reflect in a different part of the org. This is also how you retain top talent. Otherwise, they're gonna leave you. This is how you preserve your institutional memory. Every time you do this, you're living your values. You can say that management is not the same as leadership every goddamn day. If people don't see you making sacrifices to retain your leaders as engineers, they're not gonna believe you. And the pendulum contributes both to excellent management and better technical execution and a better technical culture that supports creativity and thinking outside of the box. Leveling, high-level transitions, definitely try to align your levels, align compensation, by which I do not mean that they have to be exactly the same. At Honeycomb, we kept them exactly the same for a long time. You know, E5 was the same as a M1, they had the same pay bands. And just as of this last pay period, we actually decided to let them float separately because, and this is kind of funny to me, I find that we can no longer recruit people to be managers at the same salary as they're willing to work as engineers. Honestly, big picture, something that I find just absolutely delightful is the fact that over the past, all right, it's not delightful, it's very hard and sad for a lot of people, but the fact that 5-7 years ago, it was like everyone had wanted to be a manager, and now it's like everyone who's a manager is like going back to be an engineer, and it's like, won't anyone be a manager, please? If I beg you, if I give you a raise, will you be a manager? I just think that's great. It's still worth doing, it carries a lot of signaling power. This is a reason to encourage people to not get that rusty, to not go for 10 years without going back to the well to refresh your skill set. This is a reason to encourage people to go back more often. This is a reason to, if you have people in your org who are going back and forth, every couple years, it should be just as possible to have a principal engineer become a director or a VP as it is for, them to go the other direction. The people who manage to build those skill sets throughout their career are just mind-blowing to me by the time they reach their 40s. I think a big part of this is also demystifying management. On a very practical level, I feel like there's still a lot of this feeling of just waiting to be tapped. Like the hand from God will come down and it is your turn to try management, which is why I feel like everyone should be asked about their career goals. Every engineer should be asked, would you like to be a manager at some point in your career? And if they say yes, what is management other than a bunch of skills? So decompose it into constituent skills. If you've got an engineer who wants to be a manager and you're like, I don't know how they're ever going to be a manager, well, don't tell them that. Be like, well, let's start with, let's help you learn how to run a meeting. Let's have you get an intern. Let's have you, have some one-on-ones with folks. Let's have you learn project management. And along the way, either they're going to get to a point where people are willing to report to them, or they're going to go, I hate this. Either way, you win. I think that if you want to build this kind of culture, you have to practice real transparency and real honesty. And sometimes this means telling people hard things. But I would rather be told something hard than continue wasting my time any day of the week. And one of the most toxic behaviors that I see at places that are struggling with this is, so by their very nature, the role of management is that of kind of an information router. You're in charge of funneling packets everywhere, and there are a lot of places where people get attached to this, and they give out information like favors or as leverage, and that cannot stand. It's terrible. Yeah. Don't build a system where people have to be a manager if they want to be in the loop or have a seat at the table. I think that a lot of this is just kind of ways of circling around the elephant in the room, which is that we have to drain authoritarianism out of our hierarchy. There's nothing wrong with hierarchies. And I say this as someone who has wanted to table flip every single hierarchy I've ever been a part of. There's nothing wrong with them. Actually, if you've read anything about systems theory, hierarchies emerge for the benefit of the bottom layers. They evolve in nature to take care of collective resources for the benefit of those collective resources. They don't have to be terrible. And in fact, command and control style management is absolutely destructive to any sort of creative effort. I actually like to visualize our org charts sort of upside down, so that the higher level management is actually supporting larger parts of the org. If it's a support system, not dominance game, then you will attract people who want to support other people, not people who want to play like monkey chess thumpers. If you're not happy as a manager, don't do it. Don't do it. I mean, you've always got to push through tough times in any role, right? But if it's really sucking your life to live, don't do it. It's not a gift to anyone. It's not a gift to anyone to have a miserable manager. And it's only going to hurt you and everyone around you. And I know that, I come from ops. I know all about the masochism gene. The there's a grenade, I will throw myself on that for the betterment of humanity. It doesn't work that way for management roles. We build these long, healthy, flourishing careers by leaning into curiosity, love of learning, and surrounding yourself with amazing people. But ultimately, only you get to say what success looks like for you. There are a few people out there who have had these straight, up and to the right careers. In my experience, they aren't any happier or more satisfied than those of us who had considerably windier routes. And at the end of the day, we've got 30, 40 years to kill in this industry, right? So this is a long game. And that's it. I've left a lot of time for questions. I hope you have some.